My brother's engagement party was held at the Fairmont in downtown Ottawa, which tells you everything you need to know about how my family operates. My mother had spent 6 weeks coordinating with the event planner. The florals were white peonies and eucalyptus, imported. The centerpieces had candles that cost $40 each, and there were 14 of them. My sister-in-law-to-be, Justine, was the kind of woman who made my mother stand up straighter, just by walking into a room. She came from a family in Westmount that had a hyphen in their last name, and a ski chalet in Tremblant. They only used 3 weeks a year. My brother had done very well for himself, and he knew it, and everyone at that party knew it too. I arrived by myself, which was fine. I always arrived by myself at these things. I took the 417 from my apartment in Centertown, and walked the last 4 blocks in heels I hadn't worn in 2 years, and I stood in the lobby of the Fairmont for just a moment before going in. Not because I was nervous, more like I needed a few seconds to remember how to be the version of myself that fit inside that room. My name is Sloane. I'm the younger one, the one who left, the one who does something with software that my family has never quite been able to explain to people at parties. My brother, Marcus, runs the family's commercial real estate development firm. My father built it from a single strip mall in Canada in 1989, and Marcus has been groomed to take it over since he was about 16. I went to Waterloo for computer science, then moved to Vancouver for a few years, then came back to Ottawa quietly and didn't tell anyone why. My father has never asked what I actually do for a living. Not once in 11 years. Inside, the room was exactly as I'd expected. Warm lighting, a string quartet, waitstaff circulating with champagne flutes and little crab crostini. My mother found me immediately and kissed my cheek and told me I looked tired. I said I was fine. She squeezed my arm and moved back toward the caterers before I could respond. I found my place card near the far end of the second table, between my cousin Darren, who was going to talk to me about his new truck, and my Aunt Marguerite, who was going to tell me she'd read an article about tech layoffs and ask if I was worried. I was used to the far end of the table. I had been sitting there, in one form or another, my entire life. The real evening started, the way it always did, with my father. Bernard Adair was 67 years old, and had the energy of a man who had never once questioned whether he belonged in the room he was standing in. He'd built Adair Property Group from nothing, which he told people once and implied constantly. He wore a dark suit and held his champagne like it was a scepter, and when he spoke, the table listened. "We have news," he said. After the second course had been cleared, Marcus and I finalized the Lakeview deal this afternoon. Justine pressed her hand to her chest. Marcus smiled the smile of a man who had been expecting to smile exactly this smile for several months. "Tell them the number," my mother said. 48 million, my father said. Mixed-use development on the waterfront. Condos, retail, 2 floors of commercial lease space. Breaking ground in the spring. The table responded the way my father liked. Congratulations, raised glasses, exclamation points delivered in person. My Uncle Claude gripped Marcus's shoulder. Justine's mother, who had driven down from Westmount for the occasion, nodded with the serene confidence of a woman who had expected nothing less. I took a sip of water. "The complication," my father continued, settling back into his chair, "is timing. We've got a gap between our anchor financing closing and the first equity tranche coming in. 6 to 8 weeks probably. We need bridge capital to keep the project moving. Around 600,000. I set my glass down. "I can help with that," I said. The table went quiet. Not the considering kind of quiet. The kind that happens when someone says something in the wrong register for the room they're in. Marcus recovered first. "That's really kind," he said, in the tone people use when they're being careful. "But we're working with institutional lenders. It's a whole structure. I know what bridge financing is," I said. "I'm saying I can cover the gap." My father cleared his throat. "Sloane, we're not talking about a personal loan. This is commercial development. There's due diligence, security, compliance. It's not the same world as tech." I didn't say it was the same world. Justine's mother tilted her head slightly, a microscopic adjustment that meant she had decided to be polite about this. My Aunt Marguerite jumped in with a kindness that wasn't quite helping. "It's a generous thought, sweetheart, but 600,000 isn't exactly something you just have sitting around. And even if you did, mixing family money with a project this size can get very complicated, very fast." "Your aunt's right," Marcus said. "It's not about doubting you. It's just not realistic." I looked at my father. He looked at his dessert fork. "Of course," I said. "I understand." I reached into my clutch and took out my phone under the table. My financial manager, a woman named Celestine Brochu, was meticulous, efficient, and had never once in 8 years failed to respond to my messages within 20 minutes, no matter the hour. I typed 9 words. "Flag the Adair property file." "You know what to do." I put the phone face down beside my water glass and listened to my father describe the Lakeview project for the next 40 minutes. He talked about the waterfront access and the city rezoning approval, and the firm they'd hired for the architectural renders. Marcus talked about the commercial lease pre-commitments they'd already secured. Justine talked about what the neighborhood was going to look like in 10 years. And she was genuinely insightful about it. And I think under different circumstances, I would have enjoyed the conversation. But I was a guest at that table, present technically, included in the way that a photograph of someone is including them. At some point my father mentioned the equity partner anchoring the Lakeview deal. A private investment group out of Toronto, he said, sophisticated, low profile, not the kind of outfit that advertised. They'd backed 2 of Adair Properties' last 3 major projects and delivered every time. My father described them with the particular reverence people reserve for things they rely on completely, but understand only partially. They don't chase press, he said. No splashy announcements. They just show up when they say they're going to show up, and they do what they say they'll do. That's rarer than people think. My phone vibrated once against the tablecloth. Confirmed. Our fund holds 34% participation in the Lakeview equity stack. Bridgewood Capital Partners, that's us. I've flagged it. Awaiting your instruction. I turned the phone over, screen down. They sound like exactly the right kind of partner, I said. The best I've worked with, my father said. And he was looking at Marcus when he said it. He didn't glance in my direction at all. My father's phone rang at 10:43. He almost didn't answer. We were mid-conversation about the string quartet. Of all things. Justine's mother had asked who had arranged the music. But something about the contact name made my father pause. He excused himself and walked to the corridor near the coat check. And even from 2 tables away, I could see the shift in how he was standing before I could hear anything he was saying. Marcus noticed first. He put his champagne down. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When my father came back to the table, he looked like a man who had just been told that the ground under a building he was standing in had turned out to be something other than ground. There's been a development, he said carefully. Our equity partner, Bridgewood. They're saying there's been a restructuring at the fund level. They've suspended their position in Lakeview. Silence. What does suspended mean? Marcus said. It means their capital isn't accessible. It means the Lakeview financing doesn't exist right now. My father sat down. I don't understand. We have a signed term sheet. Marcus was already on his phone. My Uncle Claude said something about calling the lawyer. Justine looked at her mother. The string quartet, in a moment of exquisite bad timing, transitioned into something soft and romantic. My Aunt Marguerite looked across the table at me. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I was the only person at the table who hadn't yet reacted. Do you know anything about this kind of thing? She asked. Not unkindly. She seemed to genuinely believe I might have a useful perspective, which was more than she'd offered me an hour ago. A little, I said. My father looked up. His eyes were very steady, in the way that meant he was working hard to keep them that way. The group is called Bridgewood Capital Partners, I said. They're private. No public profile, no press releases, structured through a series of holding companies. But they're one of the most liquid independent funds operating in Ontario right now. Real estate focused, primarily the Golden Horseshoe and Ottawa Valley markets. Total assets under management, somewhere in the range of 400 million. The table was quiet. How do you know that? Marcus said. Research. Nobody researches a private fund that carefully without a reason. He looked at me the way he hadn't looked at me in years. Like he was actually seeing me. What's your reason, Sloan? I looked at my father. Check your email, I said. I just sent you something. He picked up his phone slowly. He read whatever was on the screen once, and then he read it again. And then his hand lowered to the table, and he looked at me the way I had never, in 32 years, seen my father look at anything. Like the architecture of something he had believed in completely had just revealed itself to be something else entirely. Read it out loud, I said quietly. His voice came out just above a whisper. Bridgewood Capital Partners, Principal Ownership, Summary. He stopped. Controlling interest. He stopped again. I'll finish it, I said. Controlling interest 83%. Primary stakeholder. I kept my voice even. Sloan M. Adair. Total assets under management $412 million. The string quartet was still playing. Nobody at the table seemed to notice. Justine made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Marcus set his phone down on the tablecloth with the deliberate care of someone trying not to drop it. My Aunt Marguerite had both hands pressed flat on the table. My father hadn't moved. You're Bridgewood, he said. I've been Bridgewood for 3 years and 4 months. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Sloan, how? I folded my hands in my lap. This was the part I had been sitting with for a long time. Not with anger, exactly. Anger would have been easier, maybe. What I had was something with more weight to it. Something that had been accumulating slowly and quietly for years. The way interest accumulates when no one's paying attention to it. When I left Ottawa at 23, I said, I had about $30,000 saved and a piece of software I'd been building in my apartment in the Glebe for 2 years. I sold the first licensing deal 14 months later for a little under $2 million. I didn't spend it. I didn't put it in a savings account. I invested it. I made mistakes. Some of them were expensive. I made better decisions. I kept going. I looked at my father. I learned how to think about real estate from you, Dad. Not directly. You never sat me down and explained it. But I was always listening when you talked about land value and timing and what makes a site worth the risk. You thought I wasn't paying attention because I wasn't asking the questions Marcus was asking. But I was paying attention. I was always paying attention. 400 million, Marcus said. His voice was very quiet. 412, and you put it into us. He looked at me. Into Dad's projects. I invested it into projects that met my criteria. The fact that the developer was our father was a factor, but it wasn't charity. Every dollar I put into Adair Property Group was a calculated decision based on asset quality and track record. I paused. You build good things. I've always believed that. I never doubted the work. Then why? Marcus said. And then he stopped and started again. Why pull the capital? Why tonight? I had been waiting for that question. I had known it was coming, and I had thought about how to answer it honestly without it sounding like a speech. Because the last thing I wanted was for this to feel like a speech. Because tonight, I said, when I offered $600,000 to cover a gap that, relative to where I actually am, is the equivalent of someone handing you $40. The table laughed. Dad said it wasn't realistic. You told me it wasn't the same world. Aunt Marguerite said I didn't have the money and wouldn't understand the complexity even if I did. I kept my voice level. I have been quietly backing this company, through a construction slowdown, through 2 interest rate cycles, through a supply chain disruption that nearly killed the Rideau Valley project in 2023, and tonight, at a table full of people who love me, I was still the one who didn't quite understand how real business worked. The peonies sat in their centerpiece vases, white and perfect and completely indifferent to what was happening around them. My father put his face in his hands. He stayed like that for a moment. When he lifted his head, his eyes were red at the edges, and Bernard Adair, who I had never once, in my life, seen cry, looked like a man standing in the open air after a building he'd been inside had come down. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said. I needed to say it clearly, and I needed them to hear it clearly. I want to be honest about that. I'm not trying to humiliate anyone. I'm doing this because something needed to change, and I have tried for a long time to change it in quieter ways, and it didn't work. You weren't looking in my direction. I didn't know how else to make you look. My father's voice when it came was rough. Sloan, he said. For what, specifically? I asked. I wasn't asking to be cruel. It mattered, the specifics mattered. He was quiet for a moment, then for not seeing you, for assuming, for talking about the business for 20 years and never once thinking to ask what you were building. His voice broke slightly on the last word. I built this company so my children would have something. And then I acted like you weren't one of the children I built it for. That's on me. That is entirely on me. Marcus looked at the tablecloth. I've been talking down to you since we were kids. I didn't even realize I was doing it, which is maybe worse. He looked up. I'm sorry, Sloan, I mean that. Justine reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, quietly, you built something extraordinary, and you apparently felt like you had to keep it invisible just to get through a family dinner without being managed. That's not okay. We have to do better than that. I looked around the table, at my father, who looked older than he had an hour ago, but also somehow more present, at my brother, who was watching me with an expression I didn't have a word for, at Justine, who had just become, in that moment, someone I thought I might actually like. Here's what I want, I said. I'll restore the Bridgewood position. Full participation reinstated. Lakeview moves forward on schedule. I paused. But I am not a silent partner anymore. I want a seat in the actual conversation, not as a favor, not as a courtesy, as someone who has earned it. I want my name in the room the same way Marcus's name is in the room. And I want this family to stop deciding what I'm capable of before I've had a chance to speak. My father stood up. He walked around the table and he stood in front of me, and for a moment he didn't say anything. You have always been capable, he said. I just never asked you to prove it to me. That was my failure, not yours. He put out his hand. I looked at it for a moment and then I shook it. Then I picked up my phone and called Celestine. Restore the Bridgewood position, I said. Full reinstatement. And add a top-up draw. $2 million for the Lakeview commercial phase build-out. I paused. Yes, tonight. The paperwork can wait until Monday. I paused again. Happy to do it. I hung up and looked at my family. Really looked at them. In a way I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long time. Because looking too directly at something you want and can't have is its own kind of pain. The capital will be back in place by Monday morning, I said. The Lakeview project is a good project. I'd have backed it regardless. My father let out a short, genuine laugh, the surprised kind. You would have? You built something worth investing in, I said. I just needed you to know who was investing in it. Later, after the dessert plates had been cleared and the string quartet had packed up, and Justine's relatives from Westmount had drifted toward the elevator. My mother found me near the coat check, waiting for my ticket. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just stood beside me, and then she put her hand on my arm, and she kept it there. I always knew you were going to do something that mattered, she said. I just kept expressing it wrong, as worry, as questions about whether you were eating enough, sleeping enough, if you'd found someone, if you were okay. She paused. I was never actually asking any of those things. I was asking if you were happy. I just didn't know how to say it. I know, I said. Are you happy? I thought about it honestly, the way you can only do in a corridor, at the end of a long night when your guard is finally down. I'm getting there, I said. She squeezed my arm and didn't say anything else, and that was exactly right. The drive back to Centertown took 11 minutes. The city was quiet in the way Ottawa gets in late October, the canal dark and flat, the leaves mostly gone, the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. I parked and sat in the car for a moment before going inside. $412 million and my name on a term sheet. 3 years and 4 months of being invisible. A handshake with my father that had lasted exactly 2 seconds, and meant more than anything else that had happened that evening. I had built the thing I needed to build. I'd just been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for the rest of them to finally be curious enough to ask.